I wanted to make everyone aware that at BonnaireChristianChurch.org, there is a page called Sojourners Classes, and there are resources there. That's where I put all of the recordings for previous week's classes, but also on the church's YouTube channel. Our classes are recorded and they're there. So if you miss a class, you can always go.
You said sojourners, but I kind of like that also. I like sojourners. I know it's sojourners.
Sojourners.
Sojourners. Really cool.
Sojourners. Okay.
I know, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty clever.
Yeah.
Well, I'm from Kentucky, so I can pronounce it
I
any
like
way I want.
sojourners.
I do too.
Sojourners.
I know.
Hey. I
Oh,
like that.
okay, 1 Peter 2:10, 2:11.
No,
Oh,
not yet.
Oh,
Okay.
somebody's got to leave it.
Not yet. But in addition, on that page, there are other resources. And one resource that I found and I looked at this past week was they actually have the Bible Project, which we've watched some of the videos from the Bible Project before. And they have one on 1 Peter that gives a little overview of 1 Peter. So you can go, the link to that is on our Sojourners page. And you can go there and look at that and get kind of an overview of 1 Peter. And Bernie, what we're studying this year, if you didn't know, was we're studying all of the other books.
Yeah, the minor books.
Yeah, we're trying to get all of the minor ones, and then we'll probably end up going back and jumping back into the Gospels again or something else after we go through this. But it'll probably take us all year to get through the minor books.
Wait, I was
But
going to
another
say just
thing-
New Testament then?
Yeah.
Because the Old Testament's so much more fun.
Oh, it's
Really?
creepy.
I love it.
We'll-
It's creepy.
We'll let you come and teach some of the Old
I
Testament.
love teaching
Oh,
OT.
God.
OT is so much fun.
Oh.
And see, it's like you're going through the OT and then it's like you say, yeah, but this is where they also address this in the New Testament. And yeah, I don't know, New Testament's.
Yeah. Well, I think that Peter is one of the, well, whoever Peter was, but the author of 1 Peter is said to use more Old Testament quotes from the Old Testament than almost any other,
Which
writer.
totally makes sense since he's trying to channel Peter, who wanted everybody to be Jewish first.
That's right. But another thing that we're doing in addition to studying those other books is that we, Kathy, during the pandemic, was particularly interested in studying the Psalms. And she says that during the dark days, the Psalms really helped her. And so what we're doing as a part of that, recognizing that, is that we're at the beginning of each class, we're going to take a Psalm and we're going to study or not study it, but use that as our prayer, for the class. And so today I decided to, we're using this book usually that called Prayers to the God of My Life. And that has morning and evenings sections of Psalms that you can get that Kathy's sharing. So we're all sharing that book. But today, since Psalm 34, a portion of Psalm 34 is actually repeated in some of the things we'll be studying, hopefully today, in 1 Peter. So I've chosen Psalm 34 and today to read that particular Psalm. And does anyone know what an acrostic poem is?
I'm sorry, which Psalm number are we talking about?
34.
I missed-
And that's what I have printed out for you there.
Okay.
And acrostic.
Acrostic
Isn't
poem.
it where
Let
you
me
take
text
a,
Jamie. Jamie will know.
you take a word and the first line and you run it vertically, and then the first line is in order the letters from
Right,
that
you know,
word.
like taking
That
the
shows the
word
word.
love and making things associated with love that start with LOVE.
Okay.
Okay, that kind of thing. That's what an acrostic poem is. Well, this particular psalm is an acrostic poem.
Which would be really helpful if we knew Hebrew.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
but it's not spelling out anything. It is, does anyone know how many letters there are to the Hebrew alphabet?
24, isn't it?
22.
22. Okay.
And how many verses are in this psalm?
22.
22. Okay.
Oh, I
Now,
know Isaiah.
So I was going through and I tried to look at the Hebrew and I tried to look at the letters and then what they were, and I couldn't figure it out, but that's what they say. So I'll trust
Yeah,
that they
mine
know what
lists
they're
the letters
talking
in the
about.
margin.
Does it?
Mhm.
Yeah, didn't make any sense to me, but anyway. So the preface of this psalm is referring to David escaping from
Abimelech.
Abimelech.
Oh, I love Abimelech.
Okay.
Okay.
He pretended like he was crazy or insane. So
Excellent.
he would
See, the Old
face, he was going to be captured by the Philistines. So in that culture, when you're crazy, you're thought to be cursed. And so people don't want to have anything to do with you. So where they were going to torture or kill David, they didn't. And it saved David by him acting insane.
So they drove him out because apparently being cursed is contagious.
Yes, yes. So in this psalm, David
Like
is
too
giving
easy.
thanks to God for hearing his prayers and for protecting him. So
They're cursed, but they're blessed because you can't kill a cursed person because, God's touched them in some way or another, and we don't understand them, but we can't kill them.
it's
So
like the people who speak in tongues or whatever, I guess. So I'm going to read the first part and then I think your second, your third, and
You
your
gave me
fourth,
three,
so
yeah.
that it's a little easier on all of us. So of David, when he pretended to be insane before Abimelech, who drove him away, and he left. And here's the prayer. I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. I will glorify in the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name. I sought the Lord and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame.
The poor man called, and the Lord heard him. He saved him out of all his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Fear the Lord, you his holy people. For those who fear him lack nothing. The lion may grow weak and hungry, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. Come, my children, listen to me. I will teach you to fear the fear of the Lord.
And the next one that Catherine's going to do is actually a portion of this we'll have in First Peter.
And I'm gonna read from NRSV. Which of you desires life and covets many days to enjoy good? Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit. Depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their cry. The face of the Lord is against evildoers, to cut off the remembrance of them from earth. When the righteous cry for help, the Lord hears and rescues them from all their troubles.
The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. The righteous person may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all. He protects all his bones, not one of them will be broken. Evil will slay the wicked, the foes of the righteous will be condemned. The Lord will rescue his servants. No one who takes refuge in him will be condemned.
Amen.
Mhm.
And so David vows to constantly praise and honor God. It's also in here, the angels of the Lord encamps around those who fear him. That they say that that's one of the first places where angels are mentioned as guardians of the righteous in the Bible. did you hear the part about the broken bones?
Mhm.
And what do you think that might be referring to New Testament wise?
Are you saying like the broken like leg or something?
Um,
The crucifixion?
Yeah, the Passover lambs
Mhm.
had to be prepared without breaking any bones, and that Jesus was crucified without any bones being broken.
Mhm.
So they're referring that some things in this psalm is referring to what's going to be happening in the New Testament. And in this particular passage, we also hear fear of the Lord, which we hear all the time, usually, you know, in the New Testament, the Old Testament. And one of the comments was that apparently, and I think that Catherine, you might have mentioned this last week, that it doesn't mean that we should be frightened of God, but that we should have a good relationship with God. And a good relationship begins with a reverent sense that God is powerful and righteous, and that that we shouldn't, it's not like the kind of fear that I always think of when they say fear God. So in here, David is also, I think in one part here, it says, the righteous may have many troubles. And I think in First Peter, that's what we're hearing. First Peter was written, do you remember who it's written to from previous weeks? Nancy, you remember?
Not off the top of my head. I'm in a fog this morning.
Okay,
The churches of Asia Minor.
it's Gentiles.
Mostly
Peter
Gentiles.
is writing to Gentiles in what's now modern Turkey. And it's to all the churches. It's not just like a lot of Paul's letters are written to a specific church. This is a lot of these letters that we're going to be studying are called the Catholic lowercase, there always says lowercase c,
Mhm.
Catholic letters, meaning that it's written to the broad church, not just to one particular church. But it is because of the suffering and that the Christians are going through, the Christian Gentiles are going through in these areas.
I
So
just had a thought in terms of how they were titled, because Paul's letter was written to the Church of Corinth, and so we call it the letter to the Corinthians, so forth and so on.
Mhm.
But Peter's, because it was written to everybody, couldn't be apparently named the letter to everybody, so it's named after the author. There are no letters named Paul,
Right.
Oh,
because
yeah.
we knew where they were being addressed to, so we called it the letter to the.
And
the
then it
one
was
that-
not uncommon then to write
In the style of,
in the style of
right,
somebody much more famous than you.
yeah,
Right.
which is
And-
what this is.
This morning's letter, First Timothy or Second Timothy or whatever, it's Paul written to Timothy.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Right.
So
Right.
Okay, that's the one awake phrase that I have. I can go back to sleep now.
okay,
So
Good use of it.
I think Kathy was the one talking about that last Sunday though about the fear.
Yeah, we've
okay.
talked about it
Fear.
the week before. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice when you're not here to be able to go and watch the videos, especially if you're going to teach the next week
Right.
and see what was going on.
It is.
But just to recap what we've done, because we've had 2 weeks of study of First Peter, so far. And we found that this letter that First Peter is really giving the persecuted Gentile Christians a reminder that they have hope in the midst of their suffering.
Mhm.
It's also, as we'll study today, it's trying to help them to learn how to live faithfully in the midst of the hostile society that they're in. And I think that, Sarah, when you were teaching a couple of weeks ago, it was not specifically the government that was being hostile at that
Right.
time toward them
It was just the culture. in general.
in the area,
That
but it was
doesn't
the
sound
general
familiar
culture
at all.
their people that they're possibly their husband or their boss or their master or whatever, that didn't understand this new cult, foreign cult, of Christianity that was coming in. So we talked a little bit about that. And then there was a opening greeting that Peter went through. And in the greeting, he was really letting these Gentiles know that they are, whereas before the Jewish people were the chosen people, now he's letting them know that by being Christians and believing in Christ and following Christ, you are now a part of that heritage. You are the chosen people of God. Okay. And that's something I was kind of weird that Peter said, because Peter was kind of fighting that at the very beginning, about Gentiles and all of that, but that they are the chosen people of God. He says, you are obedient children. Do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance, type of thing. That was from the first chapter. So it was really a strategy that Peter repeats in the whole letter, that he wants these suffering Christians to know that they now belong to the family of Abraham. And that's why he brings up a lot of stories and instances where he's talking about things happening, bringing up the New Testament and reminding of that. And then he starts introducing that, he introduces that theme in the body of the letter, where a new identity is the holy people of God. That they, and I think that he goes through, I think, Kathy, you had mentioned 34, there are 34 statements in First Peter about what you should do to be, what your responsibility as a holy person of God is. And one of the first things was, I kind of like was, so it says, he takes even more memorable the Old Testament images about the family of Israel, and then he applies them to these Gentile Christians. So like the Israelites who left Egypt, they too are to gird up their loins, pull your boots up by the bootstrap or whatever, and leave behind your former ways of life on the way to a new future, kind of thing. So, so they are the holy people of God now. And it says, they are the people of the new Exodus. They have been redeemed by the blood of Jesus, who is the ultimate Passover lamb. And then it goes on, they talk about how they are now a part of the rock, which Peter was the rock, how they're actually building a new temple on the foundation of Jesus himself. And it brings us up to applying these images of the persecuted Gentile Christians into their brand new story. And it leads them into the section of, okay, how are you going to live in this society as a Christian? And we think about that today.
I'd like to just interject. I'd like to disconnect the image of girding up your loins to the pulling up the bootstraps, just because I think that they have two completely separate purposes. Pulling up your bootstraps is
Pulling up
is
the
about
bootstraps was
your-
mine, so you can
I know,
strike
I know,
that.
but it's there, so I'm talking about it. But that's more of a self-reliance thing, and I think that the girding up your loins, the pulling up your skirt and tucking it in, and is more like, pushing up your sleeves and getting down to work. There's much more of a service-oriented, you're going to be doing for others in the girding up your loins and getting into the mud and getting into the dirt, doing all of the mucky things that,
See, I see both of them as
Yeah.
being similar.
I see.
I
see
think about
the
images in
bootstraps
Florida
as-
right
yeah.
now, pulling
Yeah.
up your bootstraps
I
is
just,
a service,
yeah.
to get out there and pull somebody out of the water.
Well,
So I
I-
think
I
it's-
just
well-
associate bootstraps so much more with the financial self-reliance thing as opposed, and the improving your, it's just become a different thing to
Well,
me. in
they're getting
common
down to work.
culture.
They're getting down to
Yeah,
work
getting
either
getting
way.
down to work. Yeah,
Yeah,
getting
Suck
down
it
to work.
up, do it.
Yeah,
That's it.
no,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I always say buckle
Yeah.
up, buttercup.
But, you know, the
And
next
why'd you
section,
look at me when you said
I don't
that?
the next section that
You're
we're
the boss
talking
when I'm
about,
associated.
the next section we'll be
You're already
reading
out there.
about is about conducting yourself and living in this, within the structures of society. And in the Bible Project, they actually named the area that this is suffering as a witness to Jesus, you know, also. And I think about suffering, and we think about this in persecuted Christians back then, but just think of the instances that even today, what's going on, you know, in the world and where people are suffering. You think for religion. And it says that more people have died for their religious faith in this century than all the rest of the history combined. Thousands of Christians died in East Africa. Millions have suffered under Soviet and Chinese governments. Oppression goes on. We see it here in our own country. What advice, you know, Peter's going to be giving advice, but what advice would you be giving to these Christians? You know, Peter takes up this challenge. You have, do you tell them to give up? Do you tell them to fight? You know, what would we be telling people today? Look at what's going on with the young woman in Iran and the protests that are happening there and what's going on there. And we may be surprised as to what Peter advises, you know, people to do.
It's mostly don't lose faith. I think that, you know, I think whatever that means for you individually is terms of a call to action, but, you know, it's like God is with you.
Well, that's a, you know, the great, what I consider the great oxymoron of the Christian faith is Christ was a pacifist, and yet we're supposed to do things.
I don't think that we're
That's-
called to do, I think that we're called to pacifism. I don't think that we're called, I don't think that that's an oxymoron at all, but pacifism is an active thing. It's like we look at what happened with the civil rights movement. We look at what happens with Gandhi. Those were pacifistic movements. You sit down and passively resist, and resistance in mass and pulling all of those people together to sit down and refuse to move is an amazing force.
I agree with that, but I mean, it's still pacifism. It is what we're called to do, but I mean, it's how you look at it, and the way I look at it's a little different. That's all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't think it means don't fight. It just means don't, you know, kill, don't lash out, don't hurt others, to continue to be Christian, continue to be God's people in the face of all of the evil in the world.
And it's strange that when I think of that, I always think of Gandhi as, you know, other than Christ. I think of Gandhi because he was being Christ-like in my mind, you know. So it's strange that it was a totally different religion, but
The message is the same. And it's like so much of, you know, that's where it's like, I mean, my personal faith is that God is universal and that we're all just coming to God from different perspectives, regardless of the religion. And I think that God's message is getting out to everyone in whatever way they're going to be able to receive it.
so starting with 1 Peter chapter 2, I think we left off last week with 10, so we're going to start with 11. And what we're using, and I also have this resource on the webpage, but the People's New Testament Commentary is the one that we're using to work from, because we looked at other books and it was going to cost a lot of money to buy individual books on all of these different other books. But anyway, in the Boring and Craddock here say that for most modern Christians, this section is the most difficult part of the letter to take seriously. That Christians are told to live their lives in a given social structure, And so as we read through this, think about that. And they go into all kinds of reasons for that, that we can bring up if we need to. But will someone read 11 through 17?
I got it.
Thank you.
Beloved, I urge you as aliens and exiles to abstain from the desires of the flesh that wage war against the soul. Conduct yourselves honorably among the Gentiles, so that though they malign you as evildoers, they may see your honorable deeds and glorify God when he comes to judge. For the Lord's sake, accept the authority of every human institution, whether of the emperor as supreme, or of governors as sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to praise those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing right, you should silence the ignorance of the foolish. As servants of God, live as free people, yet do not use your freedom as a pretext for evil. Honor everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, honor the emperor.
Now, in your text, it mentioned Gentiles. What was that statement again?
Conduct yourselves honorably among the Gentiles, so they, though
Right.
they malign you, they may see your.
In mine, it says pagans,
Okay,
is translated as pagans there, because most of these people are
I know, that
Gentiles.
struck me as strange
But
when
they're
I read it.
Christians.
Yes, but
It's
they're
like-
now Christians.
Yeah.
And they're now, yes, and these Christian Gentiles now understand themselves to be the holy people of God, no longer the pagans or the general Gentile population that they had.
And you guys have heard my offense with pagan anyway. I think it's misused frequently.
So they are to conduct, their conduct is to consist of honorable deeds, so people can see them and see that being converted and what being a Christian means, and therefore possibly win over other people, to the Christian faith. So it's like a part of the church's evangelism mission there.
Part of that makes no sense to me. That I'm supposed to live this specific way, be a pacifist, but to honor the Roman emperor who was sacrificing Christians. Why
Well,
am I
at this
gonna-
point, that's not
Right.
not a widespread thing. That's
This is
not,
mainly their own husbands and wives and bosses, but they
Yeah,
do say
but the-
emperor.
the emperor, that's not a wide scale thing.
It's kind of like when,
Yeah.
what was the circumstance where Christ said, whose picture's on this coin?
Yeah, should I pay taxes?
Give to Caesar what's Caesar's and what to God what's God's. So it's not an easy thing to do. And in often cases, at the most extreme, you're a martyr.
Do we have a date for this letter?
Yeah, it's somewhere between 90 and 150. So we're talking second
After
to
the,
third generation after Jesus.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, because Nero was the one that was mainly known for the persecution, because persecution of Christians was ebb and wane, but
Well,
Nero.
the
It's-
commentators.
it's
have-
close to time, but.
Yeah,
it's-
The
Yeah,
it's
commentators
almost-
have noted several times that in this
This would
area,
have been post Nero, probably.
in this area, that is not, the government persecution of Christians is not
Widespread.
a major issue as far as the government. It's more the, Making-
Individual.
This-
these
the-
folks are
the community.
different from the rest of us.
Mhm.
And there is documentation of them being mocked for see how they love each other,
Mhm,
Mhm.
Right.
that kind of thing. So that it's more the societal kinds of
Well, they were
pressures.
called little Christies.
Mhm.
That's where the word comes from.
So the Bible Project mentions that their persecution can actually help bring clarity to their mission in the world.
Mm.
How do you think, what do you think about that?
That's a stretch.
To bear witness
That's
to
another spin on it. Yeah.
to bear witness to God's mercy among the nations. So Peter's first encourages them to submit to Roman rule, even if it's oppressive.
Sorry, which verse are we on again?
This is talking about 13 through 17.
Mhm.
Yeah, I know, I'm just like specifically on the.
You know, it reminds me of that old expression, wise as a serpent, gentle as a dove. At this point, the survival of the church was paramount. So maybe, you know, at this point, it was good advice, you know, keep your head down. They'll know you're Christians by your love, and don't rock the boat at this point, because it would have been easy for the church to have been wiped out at this particular juncture.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
So as one of my former bosses used to say, keep your head down till the shooting stops.
They're
Right.
only reloading. That's all.
Right, because in the verse before that, in verse 12, it says, always behave honorably among the Gentiles so that they can see for themselves what moral lives you lead.
Right.
And when the day of reckoning comes, give thanks to God for the things which now make them denounce you as criminals.
And mine doesn't say honor in any of this. I guess that's part of my confusion, because this
What's the difference
says,
in translation?
yeah, but it's honor is a very significantly different word. It says accept the authority of every human institution. That's far cry from honoring in what way we think of as honoring, accepting the authority of the Roman.
Well, that's what this one says. This one says on
Yeah.
17, respect everyone,
Mhm.
love other believers, honor God, and
Yes.
respect the emperor.
Yeah.
You
I
see,
think it,
that's funny, because it's like mine actually, it goes the exact opposite and reverses all of that. Mine says honor everyone, love the family of believers, fear God,
Fear
and then
God.
honor the emperor.
Right.
That one says honor the emperor at that point.
Yeah, it
So,
says,
yeah.
and I think in the commentary it mentioned
I
the
like
emperor and
respect.
governors are to be honored along with all other human beings, but only God is to be.
But I think also, I mean, they're not, it's never saying worship the emperor.
No.
It's, you know,
Yeah.
it's saying.
And so let's move on to 18 through 25. Here we're going to see how he's instruction. He says it says instructions to slaves and to all. Okay, so I think that in this chapter, he's really talking about everyone, but he's using slaves and later wives as a particular instance to talk about. So 18 through 25. Someone
got it.
read that?
Okay. Slaves, accept the authority of your masters with all deference, not only those who are kind and gentle, but those who are harsh. For it is a credit to you if, being aware of God, you endure pain while suffering unjustly. If you endure while you are beaten for doing wrong, what credit is that? What credit is that? But if you endure when you do right and suffer for it, you have God's approval. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you as an example, so that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. When he was abused, he did not return abuse. When he was suffered, he did not threaten, but he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, so that free from sins, we might live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed, for you were going astray like sheep, but now you have returned for the shepherd and the guardian of your souls. See, and I would say that all manner of hell has come from crap like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, amen. Too many women have been abused, too many people have been abused, too many subcultures have been abused, because they're basically being told, you need to be subservient, and to be a good Christian, you need to basically deal with the lot that you have been given. And that's the same thing that they preach in India, or used to preach in India, to establish and maintain the caste system. I mean, it's the exact same crap that's saying, deal with the beatings that you're given.
Yeah, every, warned you
Run
last
away,
week, there are
walk
gonna be
away.
some tough, because culturally, we're at 2,000 years in a very different place. I think our society is in a very different place now than 40 years ago or 50 years ago when we were kids. You know,
I'm
we-
so glad you think we were kids 40 years ago.
well,
I'm thinking just-
right, so,
Mentally, we are.
Think about this compared to the pseudo letters of Paul, the conciliatory letters of Paul, had already began to take on this type of theology, so it's not unlike the pseudo letters of Paul.
right,
Yeah.
I'm not
Right.
saying that any of them were right.
Well, if you look at it more from a big picture and taking in context what Nancy had mentioned, it was more, this might be more about the survival of the church at that period of time. I mean, this really goes against what our current Christian belief is and how you should, not put up with all the beatings and so on. And I think maybe that big picture is the greater issue here, or the greater theme.
Well, and you think about India with Gandhi and how what he did and what the people that followed him did had people looking at what the British people were doing with a different set, with a different of just how terrible it was. And therefore, some social change occurred, as a result of it.
I mean, social change is a process. It doesn't happen overnight, very, very rarely.
No, it's generational.
Right, you're
Okay.
exactly right. And, we're also 2,000 years ago, these churches that this letter was written to were very small groups. They were not,
House churches.
right, they were not the majority of the society by any means. So I think, Nancy, your point, and Bernie, you're following up with that.
That's
I
a greater
hadn't thought of that
message,
from that perspective.
I hadn't
It
either.
makes a big
but
difference.
that's a greater message, I think,
Yeah, if you're,
thus far.
Yeah, no, I mean, it absolutely makes sense if we're talking about this in terms of, this is the message to help Christianity survive this time period. And, we're dealing with, it's like, that is the necessary culture of their society. And, and I don't disagree with that, but I also think that, obviously this kind of message that's written and encoded into the message of Christianity is part of the problem with our society today, and part of the problem with a lot of people wanting to come to Christianity is they still read these messages and say, this is what you believe.
and not everybody does.
I know not everybody reads.
Well,
They just
True.
listen and watch.
yeah, but
Text.
I think there also is still a
Really
message
short.
in here for us in terms of, in those situations where, if I was in Ukraine right now, and I'm trying to fight the Russians, is there a message in here for me in that kind of situation?
I loved the story. I
In
was
terms of
reading.
maintaining
Yeah,
your dignity and your focus.
yeah. I love that you bring the Ukraine into this though, because I loved the message, and you're absolutely right that right now they're in survival mode. Those people that have been taken under Russian control are in survival mode. But I loved the story I was reading about the teacher who, when given that list of 1,000 books that she needed to pull from the schools, she took them all and hid them in her home. And it's like, and she's being told by other teachers, why are you bothering doing this? We're Russian now. We have to deal with being Russian. And she's like, I'm doing this, it's like she's doing this out of hope. She's doing this out of a place of, what we're experiencing right now doesn't necessarily have to be the long-term outcome. And I am not ready to give up that hope.
And hope was one of the key words used earlier in First Peter,
Right,
you know, offering that hope,
yeah,
that these people have that hope
yeah,
that it will be better
yeah,
in the
Right.
future.
yeah.
The hope of the prophets.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then we had that lovely little faith hope conversation that I still want to get into. But yeah, the whole mentality, it's like, are you, it's like, and of course, the message is never giving up, you know, on a better future. It's, you know, tolerating what you have to today, but finding a way. I love that message that I get from that teacher of finding a way to create more of that hope and
And
more
she
of
is-
that.
And
you
she's
know.
therefore also resisting.
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
it's a passive resistance.
Exactly. I
Okay.
love that. Yeah.
And one of the statements in the Bible Project video that it said at this point was that, and this is it also speaks to the next section a little bit too, but it says, yes, he acknowledges their persecution, but their suffering is unjust, but violent resistance solves nothing, not to mention that it betrays the teachings of Jesus, who loved his enemies instead of killing them. Peter then specifically highlights the very difficult situations that Christian slaves, which we read about, and later in the next section, wives faced when they lived in Roman households where the patriarch did not follow Jesus. No. So difficult times and situations. We'll pick up next week with the instructions that he gives to wives and husbands.
I was like, is it time already?
Well, it's
Yeah.
10 till, I think that usually
Yeah.
we try to break off about here, so I hate to get into the wife situation when
There's only a minute to go.
more discussion.
Yeah, that's gonna be an interesting discussion in this group.
Yeah.
Right, but it's also, like I said earlier, the commentators say that this isn't just, they're using wives and slaves as examples, but that they don't mention widowers and widows and all of these other people, but they say to slaves and to all, to the whole community. These things are being said, so.
And husbands have endured every bit as much as, you know, it's like there are husbands that endure as much as wives, and, you know, depending on who their spouse is.
Yeah, when I got married, I was 6'8", and then wham, wham, wham.
Oh,
Considering how
Okay.
short,
You have what now?
considering how short Jamie is, there's not a person in this room buying this story.
I'm not talking about physical abuse necessarily. Sometimes though. Sometimes.
That's a sticker. The sticker in my garage says the beatings will continue until the morality improves.
Yeah.
Any other notes or questions from our Zoomies?
No, thank you so much for the class. I'm with Kathy. It absolutely flew by. I was surprised when you said time was up.
Well, it's 10 till, and usually we try to
I
cut
think
in so people
Claire,
can get to
Claire
church.
has a job situation now that's keeping her from being here.
Well, she
today.
didn't have Wi-Fi last
So-
week.
Yeah, she didn't have Wi-Fi.
Hi, Claire.
Yeah, so I don't,
Yes.
Yeah, hi Claire.
Hi,
Hi, Claire.
Claire. We miss you. Hopefully you'll watch the recording.
oh, here's a text from Claire.
Oh,
I have no internet again, and this is getting to be quite a problem. Hope you are all doing okay.
I will tell her that we'll have the recording up in a couple of days. and
Okay,
that we
all
missed
right.
it.
All right, so I will, but there's a special greeting for her.
But if you do get a chance to, the Bible Project videos are really a lot of fun.
They
And they're-
are.
And they have just a general overview, and they use little illustrations to kind of show it. And if by watching that, I think it'll give you a general overview of the whole letter, and so that we can have a better idea, you know, when we're working through it. But
Okay.